Hi, and welcome to Uncork PA, where we showcase all things Pennsylvania wine. Join me, Missy Wilson, as we chat about the wines, wineries, and notable figures that make up the Pennsylvania wine industry. I'm a second generation winery owner at Sutter Ridge Vineyards in Kutztown, and I've loved being part of the Pennsylvania wine scene for over 15 years now. Today, I'm excited to chat about some of the lesser talked about cousins of wine, cider and mead. In Pennsylvania, a limited winery license actually permits a winery to produce wines, alcoholic ciders, meads, wine coolers, and fermented fruit beverages. So, throughout the past episodes that we've been doing on Uncorked PA, we've really focused on grapes and vineyards and wineries. But this episode, we'll be learning a little bit about cider and meads, and I'm excited to have both Evan Gruber from Old Stone Cider and Scott Neely from Kingview Mead on the program today, passing on their knowledge and giving us a little bit more of that information. If you're interested in trying some Pennsylvania cider and meads, I'll actually give you a few options of places to try and lead you to some good places to do some research of other places nearby you or places that you might want to go out and visit. So, just as grapes are the base of wine, cider starts with apples. And because Pennsylvania is the fourth largest producer of apples in the country, it's actually a perfect place to enjoy the fruits of the cider industry's labor as well. So, similar to wine, whatever your taste, there is definitely a Pennsylvania cider that you'll enjoy. And I'm happy to have join us today Evan Gruber of Old Stone Cider, located in Louisville, PA. He's just minutes from the Pennsylvania-Maryland border on the southeast portion of the state. Evan, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Missy.
Yeah, no problem. So let's start a little bit with Old Stone Cider. How did you guys get your start in cider making?
So we first started learning about cider about 12, 13 years ago. At the time, my dad had been doing some work in England and Europe, and he brought European-style hard ciders back that we, tried and enjoyed. And at the time, really the main options on the U.S. market were sort of Angry Orchard and Woodchuck, those kinds of ciders, which tend to be very sweet. And the European style ones were dry, tart, more unusual flavors. So we enjoyed those, and from there we learned about the different types of apples for making cider, those styles of cider, and we were looking for a new project to get into. So we started planting an orchard, and then from there the whole thing has kind of continued to grow year after year.
So you had started planting your orchard in 2010, and most people are familiar, especially being in Pennsylvania, a huge apple state. They're used to, McIntosh, Cortland's, Granny Smith, Golden Delicious apples. Are those the types of apples that you have in your orchard? And if not, or if so, either way, how did you guys decide on the types of apples that you do have planted?
So those apples that you listed, those are typically eating apples. Those are ones that were bred for appearance, shelf life, sweetness, crispness, all the things you want when you bite into an apple and want to enjoy it. The apples that we grow are heirloom varieties. A lot of them are from England and Europe or early colonial varieties of apples. So they tend to have higher acidity, more tannins, more of those dryness, and a lot of them don't taste very good when you bite into them. A lot of them they're meant to be pressed and fermented, and that's when the flavors that you're looking for come out. So when we started planting the orchard, we learned a lot from the Penn State Cooperative Extension. They offered a few classes at the time and sort of general research. And we also, you'll hear this over and over again as we go through this. It was a lot of trial and error. We planted a lot of varieties, and some of them have not worked out at all due to disease or pest pressure or whatever. And then we found other ones that have worked really well. So a lot of them, they tend to have names like Stoke Red, Black Oxford, Roxbury Russet. Those are the kinds of apples that we grow, and they tend to be more of those specific cider apple varieties.
So how many different apple varietals do you grow in your orchard?
We grow a little over 20 different kinds.
That's great. So basically, are you making about 20 different types of ciders with those, or do you kind of do blends of them, or how does it generally work with regards to the apples versus like most people know like varieties of grapes. Sometimes people blend, sometimes they don't, single
Hmm.
varietal, things like that.
So we grow a little over 20 different kinds. We usually throughout the year we make 17, 18 different types of ciders. Um, some of that is just logistical. Some wind up being blends out of necessity. I personally I try to keep our varietals as single varietal ciders. I think when people come in and they try our ciders and they taste a Roxbury Russet cider, for instance, they ought to know that that's what that apple tastes like once it's fermented. So I personally prefer to do varietals. Uh, Sometimes we do blends. There's certain ones that go together nicely, and then there's also sometimes production necessities when you blend. Um, so, which I'm sure most great winemakers will
Yep,
understand.
exactly. So, there's a lot of similarities between cider and wine, which kind of one of the major reasons it files and falls underneath the wine license versus like a brewer license. And it goes from growing the apples through fermentation, through aging, and so much more. So, like vineyards and wineries, you're currently in the harvest season, and you're actually towards the end of your finalizing your harvest, which I know everybody is always excited when that kind of comes around. Can you tell us a little bit about your harvest season and how you know when it's time to pick the apples and how you actually go about doing that?
Sure. So our harvest season typically ranges from the end of August all the way through the beginning of November. So like Missy said, we actually have one variety left to pick, which is called Gold Rush. It's one of the last ones to ripen. Um, so since we grow so many different varieties, sort of throughout the season, we'll pick, over a week or two, we'll pick one variety. We tend to go down and just pick the ripest fruit. A few days later, we'll go back and pick, the ripest fruit again. And with apples, you typically can tell from, we use a refractometer. So winemakers will know that checks the bricks, that checks the sugar content of them. And we also, just by appearance, you can tell when they're ripe. The skins change color. The seeds inside have a nice brown color. You can cut them open and take a look. But the refractometer is the main tool that you use for that.
So, what kind of sugar levels do you tend to look at when you're ready to pick your apples?
Yeah.
So, generally for grapes, and this is where kind of we'll get into a little bit more, grapes tend to, you're picking between, depending on what you're looking for, between 21 to 24, 25 bricks. What are you
Mhm.
looking for with regards to the sugar in your apples?
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on variety. The lowest is usually about 12 or 13 bricks, and then the highest is sort of whatever it can get up to. so a l- this year, in particular, we had a drought in August, which really helps. It was dry, so the apples weren't absorbing extra water, and it was sunny, so they were making extra sugar to put into the apples. So this year, the highest bricks we got were 20. We have one variety that'll be about a 10% cider, and one that'll or two that'll be about 9.5. So in a typical year, it's usually from about 12 or 13 up to about uh, 18 or 19, maybe. This year it shifted a little bit higher, so we should have some higher ABVs.
So once you pull those apples in from your orchard, how do you take the apple that everyone's just used to eating or used to like apple juice? How does that make its way into a cider?
So once we pick them, we clean them and sort them. So you pick the nicest ones out. We do that in the orchard. Uh, we have a press off-site that we use, so we haul them up to the press. They get sorted a second time there. They get washed. They go through a chipper, and then they get pressed in a hydraulic ram style press. And then we collect the juice and bring it back to our farm and ferment it in the tanks and stuff that we have on site.
And then fermentation is similar to like a normal wine or juice fermentation, where you're basically just adding yeast into
Hmm.
the cider, the pressed
Yeah,
cider, and that's what's then converting into the alcohol, the sugar into the alcohol. Correct.
correct. Yeah, so it's very similar to wine in that way. I mean, cider is produced very, very similar to wine. You take the juice, you add yeast, you control your temperatures, you rack it. All those kind of standard winemaking things um, are are how we make the cider.
So wine tends to be, like we were talking about earlier, in most wines around a 12.5% alcohol, give or take, depending on whites or reds. With ciders, what does your range tend to end up being with the alcohol content of a cider?
Yeah, usually ours is about 6.5 to 8.5. So a little bit lower, a little kind of sort of between beer and wine. Cider is, produced like wine, but it's drank like beer, typically carbonated, cold, slightly lower alcohol percentage.
So, when you had mentioned before, when most people think about ciders, they think about the mass produced, commercialized ciders, such as like a woodchuck or an angry orchard. And what a craft cider does is a little bit different than those commercially produced ciders. So, people who think of those as like this is what a cider tastes like, what can you tell them to get them convince them to try a craft cider such as Old Stone cider?
hmm Sure. So I think part of it, there's a historical context to it. Cider used to be the most popular drink in the United States when we were still colonies. I think there's definitely an education aspect where people have to try it and sort of see for themselves. I think there's a contingent of people that have tried cider once or twice and they don't like it because it's super sweet. So you have to, by giving them samples and by trying our ciders, they can learn that there's more to it than that, right? They can be dry, they can be tart, they can have complex flavors that aren't you know this tastes like a sweet apple or whatever. This tastes like a Jolly Rancher. So I think that's the biggest education thing is getting people to try it. And there's always a group of people that they just want something sweet to drink, and we have that too. We make a wide variety of them. We'll have 6 to 7 ciders on tap at any time, so there's always something people can find that they'll like. There might be stuff on the sweeter spectrum, on the dry side, and everything in between.
Perfect. So you said that you tend to make about 20 or so ciders in a year. So you tend to have, you said, about 6 to 7 on tap. So how do you rotate? What is it, seasonal that you rotate your ciders out, or how do you plan on which ciders? What are your flagship ones that you tend to have all year round, and then what are some of the ones that you kind of see that you tend to rotate?
hmm Yeah. So at the beginning of every year, we make a plan and put it on a calendar, and then about 2 weeks later, we throw the calendar out the window because it doesn't. We never. You can't get your production to be exactly how you think it'll be. Um, we do sort of a slow rotation. So we'll keg a certain volume of a cider at a time. That'll be on tap for however long it lasts, and then we may either continue that cider or switch to a different thing. Usually every month we'll have about 2 or 3 different ones rotate on and off. We do have a few flagship ciders. Our Roxbury Russet cider is a we have a lot of volume of that. It makes a nice semi-dry cider. Has a good like tartness, nice apple flavor to it without being super sweet. So that's a flagship one. Also, our Enterprise cider. That one's a little sweeter. It has almost a pear flavor. And then our Gold Rush ciders are those are ones that I'll tend to flavor a little bit more. We do a cherry one. We do a fall seasonal cider. We mostly it's sort of a gradual rotation as we go through, and just trying to maintain that, you know, 1 or 2 sweet, 1 or 2 dry, a couple semi dries in the middle, and maybe some flavored ones in there as well to round it out.
So, if people are interested in coming to visit you and do try some of your ciders that you have on hand, you do tastings of the ciders. What hours are you currently open, and what does your tastings look like?
Sure. So our tastings are similar to like a brewery flight. It's 4 4-ounce samples, and you can pick anything we have on tap. We also serve Pennsylvania beer as well. With the limited winery license, you're allowed to serve PA beer, so people can include those on the flights. Um, and yeah, you come in, you can get a flight and relax for a long time. We're open Fridays 4 to 9, Saturdays noon to 9, and then Sundays noon to 6.
And are you open all year round at your main location?
Yeah, we're open until New Year's, and then we shut down till about mid-March, and then we're open from March through New Year's. So most of the year we're open. We close down in the winter typically because it's fairly slow and it gives us a chance to work on bigger projects that we haven't had time throughout the rest of the year to work on.
So, if people are interested, if they come and visit you and they love a certain cider and they want to take some home, how do you have it available for them to take home as well?
We sell growlers, half growlers, and crowlers, so you can take it home in a bottle or a crowler can. Hopefully, next year we'll be bottling as well, so you can take it home in a bottle if you like.
Perfect. So, for those people that aren't familiar with ciders, what's the most important thing that you think that they should take away from today's show to like get them a little bit more interested and more open to trying ciders?
I think the big takeaway is that ciders are their own unique beverage, and they're more complex than what a lot of the mass-produced commercial ciders are. I think if people come out to a cidery, a local cidery, and they try some different ciders, some varietal ciders, they'll find that there's quite a bit that they enjoy from them, and there's a lot more complexity than sort of the wine cooler kind of flavor that a lot of the not to throw shade at Angry Orchard or Woodchuck, but a lot of them taste very similar to that. There's more options and more complexity out there.
Perfect. So, if people want to get some additional information about your cidery, what is the best website for you?
We're at oldstonecider.com. We also have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. You can check us out on any of those. And there's always information on upcoming events, bands, food trucks, all that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. So I definitely recommend if you haven't tried cider or you're looking to try some new craft cider, head down to Evan at Old Stone Cider. Currently open towards the end of the week. Perfect for weekends now that the craziness has kind of calmed down, kids back to school and everything else. It's a great time to go out and try some new ciders. Thanks so much for joining us today, Evan.
Thank you for having me, Missy.
Yep, definitely. So I hope Evan from Old Stone Cider got you interested in trying some ciders if you're not familiar with them, and interested in finding some new craft ciders if you already love them. One of the best tools is the Pennsylvania Wineries Association website at pennsylvaniawine.com. If you actually just type cider into the search bar, you'll find a lot of cider options available for you to try. Another option is that there is a Pennsylvania Ciders Guild, and it's a great place to search. You'll be able to look through for the cider producers throughout the entire states, so you can find those that are close to you or those maybe in a location that you're looking to visit, and you can reach them at paciderguild.org. And so, although it's made with a different product than wine, ciders are similar in very many ways, including the fact that they go from dry to sweet, they have a lower alcohol to a higher alcohol, and you have that lighter body to a fuller bodied cider. A cidery is a perfect way to find out what types you enjoy. So, between the knowledge of the staff and then having the opportunity to do a tasting on site, you'll be able to hone into some delicious ciders that are perfect for you. So now that we know a little bit more about cider, let's learn about another part of the Pennsylvania winery license, which is mead. And today we have on our program Scott Neely of Kingview Meadery, located in Mount Lebanon, just south of Pittsburgh. So thanks so much for joining us on the show today, Scott.
You're quite welcome. Hello.
So earlier we learned a little bit about ciders, so let's dive into the mead world. So first of all, tell us a little bit how you got into making mead, Scott.
Yeah, certainly. I was touring a bunch of wineries, especially up in the Niagara region. Fell in love just with the fun of it, right? It's a fun industry to be in, and I'm not Italian at all. I'm all Northern European, Irish, the whole Scandinavian spectrum. And at that time, there weren't a lot of meaderies around. There weren't a lot of meads that I had that I liked, and it was a challenge. Most importantly, though, it let me kind of build a company that really supports the whole economy in terms of food. Bees support food making. They create honey. Honey creates mead. We support the beekeepers. It's a great cycle.
Perfect. So let's start just about mead in general before we go into your meadery. Let's start with the basics. What do you need in order to make a mead?
Yeah, so mead equals honey. When you talk about any alcoholic beverage, it's either the fermentable sugar or the process. So mead equals honey, as we just learned. Apples equals cider. typically grapes equals wine. It can be fruit as well. So what you need is honey, water, and yeast, and that creates a standard mead.
Okay, so in addition, you can sometimes add some other fun stuff in there too. So what other fun things can you sometimes? So a basic mead is just sugar, honey, water, and yeast. If
Yeah.
you want to kind of change it up a little bit, what other types of things can you add in there as well?
Yeah, there's a vast spectrum of things. So anything under that winery license is a potential um, fermentable with honey. So when you're talking apples, grapes, spices, I mean, there's so many different things that you can add, and they all have different names like piment, incisor, and melomel, and metheglin. So there's quite a bit that you can do with it. It's very versatile.
So then, once you decide what your ingredients are going to be, so, you have your honey, you have your water, you have your yeast, and then you have, if you want to add anything else to it, um, how does that go into sugar and sweetness, and how does that transform into the beautiful drink that is mead?
Yeah, so it's all about understanding how much sugar you're actually putting into the must, essentially. Um, Typically, if you're using apples, you'll mix that with honey. You'll get a certain Brix level depending on how much alcohol you want to produce, and literally pitching the yeast into that. There's no real need to brew it, meaning heat it up, because the sugars are already present. So there's various techniques that you want to be cognizant of whenever you're making mead based on the additional ingredients that you're using. It can get very complex actually, but a ton of fun.
So, as we talked about with cider and with wine, the alcohol content can kind of really change, especially compared to beer. What type of alcohol content do you normally typically see in a mead?
Yeah, so you typically see some meaderies go either one or two directions, either kind of the lower end, the 4, 5, 6%, or that middle, the upper range, all the way up to 16% from a commercial perspective.
So, people have this misconception about mead that just because you're starting with honey and honey's sweet, that all mead is extremely sweet. Is that true?
Yeah, of course not. No, I mean, when you're talking fermentation, right? Grape juice, when it's first started, very sweet. Apples can be very sweet. Honey can be very sweet. It all depends on the fermentation process you use, the type of yeasts you use. And a lot of times you can have some really, really nice dry meads. The big difference when you're talking meads, honey doesn't have high acidities typically or high tannins. So people associate dry with, the saliva response or, a drying in the front of your mouth. But really, dryness is the sweetness level. And you can ferment out all the sugars if you want, depending on the yeast you're using.
Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about mead in general, let's talk about your meadery, which is Kingview Mead. You've been making mead for quite some time, and you started out originally for your own personal use, but then decided to make it more in a commercial standpoint. So, how long have you been operating commercially for?
Yeah, we sold our first bottle in May of 2016. So we're, in year 6, 7 here. So it's been about that long so far for the commercial side.
So, with regards to your honey, where are you sourcing your honey? And do you find that where you get it from makes a little bit of a difference of how the mead tastes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, honey is just as complex, if not more, than a lot of other, ingredients that you might use out there. In PA, we source everything in PA. We're a PA preferred, so all of our honey, our apples, our grapes, all that stuff comes from within PA. PA doesn't really grow cranberries or blackberries in large quantities, so we don't, we have to source those somewhere else. Um, but the thing with honey is the seasonality of it. Um, Springtime, you're going to get a nice, light honey. You get a lot of Japanese knotweed honey. There are some mono floral varieties out there, but at the end of the day, we just stick with wildflower for 90% of what we produce because that's what we can get here in Pennsylvania at a consistent.
So, tell us a little bit about your tasting room and the number of meads you tend to have on your tasting list at each time. So, if I walk into your tasting room right now, how many different types of meads do you have available?
Yeah, so we have three tasting rooms. We have one at the Tanger Outlets in Pittsburgh. We have our Mead House and Winery in Mount Lebanon, which also serves food. And then we have we're the bar inside the Cranberry Lumberjacks, Cranberry Township Lumberjacks. And we actually have a fourth location coming as well, up in the Harbor Creek area. If you go to any of those, you're going to get at least 20 different products of ours. Mount Lebanon, Tanger tend to hold a little bit more. Mount Lebanon, we have 40 taps, where 30 of those taps are ours, plus additional bottles. So, not just the meads, but obviously ciders and wines. In our mead category, you're looking at least 20 meads.
And do you change your meads out seasonally, or do you kind of just have them all on the list all at once?
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is a rotation. And some people yell at us when they go out of rotation. But, at the end of the day, we definitely do seasonal meads. And we have a 16% mead that's part of our Runic series. It's a collector's edition. We make one batch, we never make it again. And we always make it 16%. We're on the second of that series right now. So yeah, everything changes with the season, but we do have, luckily a nice stable of meads that people really want year round. Over 10 that we try to keep on at any time.
So you had mentioned earlier, but in addition to mead, you also do produce cider and wine, which means that you don't have just one crazy season; you have a constant crazy season
Yeah.
working fermentations. But tell us a little bit about the ciders and the wines that you produce as well.
Yeah, exactly. Again, PA preferred. So most of what we produce is all varieties you can find at most of the PWA wineries. Um, you know, it was a challenge for us to do, and I really like ciders. I like wines. I like mead. So, I decided to take on all three and see if I could ferment really good products. In each category, we have both dry and sweet, and everything in between. So we really mix it up. I mean, we have quite a bit.
So if people are interested in tasting the meads, the ciders, and wines, what's the best website to find out not where hours and all your locations, so they can either visit you at your main location or at any of your offsite locations as well?
Yeah, kingviewmead.com is the best place. Or follow us on Instagram, Facebook, under Kingview Mead. You can
Per-
find all kinds of information.
Great. So, if you could leave people with one little bit of information about mead, what would you want that to be?
Yeah, we hear this all the time, whether it's at a festival or our tasting rooms. People say, "Oh, I don't like mead," and I ask them, "How many have you tried?" "Oh, I had one, or I had a couple from my uncle or this place or that place." Here's the analogy I give everybody. You have Budweiser, you have Guinness. They're both beers, and that is the spectrum that you look at in terms of the differences in all the different meaderies. So go out there, keep trying different meads at all the different meaderies when you find them, because one place may do it one way versus another in different styles. I mean, it is extremely varied in terms of what you're going to find in the mead realm.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Scott, for passing on some great knowledge about mead to both myself and all of our listeners. And
You're welcome.
definitely go and visit him at Kingview Meadery.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. So now that you know a little bit more about meads, now it's a great time to find that tasting room. So then that way you can try the different varieties that Scott had mentioned, because he had said not all meads taste the same and not all meads are sweet. You have from dry to sweet, like you do for wine, and a range of variety like there is in beer. So just because you did try that mead in the past and didn't enjoy it doesn't mean that you don't like mead. So again, another great resource to find mead to try in your area would be to head to the Pennsylvania Winery Association's website, pennsylvaniawine.com, and type mead into the search bar. Meaderies throughout the state will pop up, and you can find one near you. Similar to a cidery or winery, visiting a meadery is a great starting point to find out what style you like and what style you're interested in, because you get the chance and the opportunity to try things before you buy a bottle. And you also have the wonderful knowledge of the tasting room staff to be able to help you as well. So I hope that this show has passed on a little bit more knowledge for you about those lesser talked about fermentation styles that are included in the Pennsylvania Limited wine license. Although they're not talked about as much, their popularity is expanding, and more companies are producing them throughout the state. Similar in many ways to wine, both cider and mead have that variety of style, so don't write them off as something you don't enjoy just because you've had one or two types of them. Visit 1, 2, 3 different cideries or meaderies throughout the state and enjoy that great diversity of both cider and mead that we have. As always, PennsylvaniaWine.com is a great tool to use. Look up additional information about the wineries, the meaderies, the cideries that you're interested in visiting, and then use the Create Your Own tool, Create Your Own Itinerary tool, and it'll help map you from one location to the other. Join us next time as we talk turkey. Thanksgiving's just a few weeks away, and you'll want to make sure you have a great bottle of Pennsylvania wine on your table that works perfect for your meal. Just a reminder, Uncork PA airs live the second and fourth Tuesdays of every month, starting at noon on Facebook and YouTube. If you can't join us live, don't worry. You can watch any of our programs whenever is most convenient for you. Plus, you can listen to Uncork PA on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite place to stream your podcast. We want to thank the Pennsylvania Winery Association for supporting this program with grant money from the PLCB, and we look forward to sharing more hidden gems of the Pennsylvania wine world with you next time. Have a great day.